Welcome to You Can Talk to Me, a Beatles podcast. It's time to make our way across the universe and talk all things John, Paul, George and Ringo.
Alan, thanks for joining me here on the You Can Talk to Me podcast, mate. It's terrific to have some time with you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Could you take us firstly through a little of your own filmmaking history and then where that passion for capturing stories originally came from?
There was no ambition at all to be a film director. In fact, it was probably the furthest thing away from my mind. I worked in music on a local scene where I was born in Blackburn, then further afield in Manchester with sort of local bands and promoting name bands, bringing them up and stuff. This is from being sort of 16, 17, 18. It was very early on, you know. Then I got a job as a press officer in London. I came to London as a PR, worked in PR for a few years. I then went to EMI Records. As far as I was concerned, when I started working with EMI Records, I literally had won life's lottery because A, they had a lot of my favorite bands. B, I was working in various places. So sometimes in the office, sometimes from Abbey Road, because I lived in Maida Vale at the time, and compiling basically in a great department called Catalog Department, which means you take an already established hit album and you delete it and then you reissue it with either a bonus disc or some extra tracks and a bigger booklet and blah, blah, blah. So it's like the kid got let loose in the sweet shop, you know. I was kind of hands-on with a number of the bands and so went on the road a little bit when, you know, I saw parts of the world that previously I'd never seen. And I was loving it. I was really, really loving it. And then a few years into my time doing that, because I was also helping out a few other labels, I did a couple of projects seconded to Universal, Sony, and a label called Secret that Frank Lee used to run, Jim's brother from Slade, who's a lovely guy. And around, probably I think around so 2003 or 4, this producer called Martin Baker, who was Stanley Baker's son, the incredible 60s actor, you know, Zulu and Train Robbery, stuff like that. And he rang me to get me to do some research on a project that they were doing with Don Letts, the documentary maker. And so I did a bit of research on that job. That job ended. Then they were doing another job. Oh, you've got a great musical mind. I think by then I'd got 16 published books on rock bands as well, kind of was a sideline I've been doing as well. So eventually I kind of started, I guess, around 2006, 7, where I had one foot still kind of hanging on in EMI doing records and stuff, and one foot very much focused on doing research and helping out on projects in the movie game. While that was going on, I'd done a number of books about the Sex Pistols, and the quick answer from here is I was literally offered a documentary by a company called Demon Vision to entertain, and that was going to go on to BBC 3 in the UK, but also on DVD around the world, and it was called Nevermind the Sex Pistols. And what they wanted to do at the time, Julian Temple had just done this film, The Filth and the Fury, which was John and Steve and Glenn and Paul and archiver Sid, so the 5 guys talking about the band. Sure. What they wanted, which I could easily see the logic in, is they wanted the other side of the story. So they wanted people like Malcolm McLaren, Steve Roden Conley, Alan Leather and Bones Jones. Glenn was in it because Glenn and I lived quite close to each other at the time in Maida Vale. But it was kind of the backstory. It was about the shop and who did what and everything. And we called it Nevermind the Sex Pistols. We couldn't think of a better title for it. It went out and we got a few good reviews here and there, but it was quite a low budget thing we did. I didn't give it a second thought. I put my name on it, yeah, directed by Alan Parker. There was no G in them days.
Yes.
Out it went. And we get to the end of the year, and in Time Out Magazine's UK roundup, it wins Documentary of the Year.
Wow.
And suddenly the phone starts ringing. And it's, you know, film agents going, what's next? Next? Are you kidding? I did a documentary. Let's tick that box. Yeah. Next is I go back and see what EMI have got for me. No, you should do another one. So I did another one. That ultimately led to doing the Clash movie. with a Rebel Truce, which was bought by Sky for the world. Which Don had done this amazing Clash movie called West Way to the World. But that again focused solely on Joe and Paul and Mick and Topper. My Clash movie had Mick in it, but also, one Buzzcock, one Sex Pistol, one Strangler, one Stiff Little Finger, just kind of, let's get other people, their peers have got, great admiration for the Clash as well. So it was a good idea. And then I guess is where we hit the ground running, because by then we had a little team around us. I'd written what I believe they call an airport bestseller, which was a book about Sid Vicious called No One Is Innocent. And we were approached by a distribution company who wanted to fund a sort of documentary version of that book, which we called Who Killed Nancy.
Yeah.
And that became the first one of mine that went into cinema. And really, I know this is a very easy cop out end to an answer, but the rest is history. It kind of then on it went like that, and it didn't stop.
Did you see filmmaking as an extension of your rock journalism and your writing in terms of the craft?
Yeah, I think, to be honest with you, the way I always viewed it is, it was something I didn't think about initially. I didn't really think when I first got asked about it that I could necessarily do it. But the more of them that I've made, the more I've found out that in my mind anyway, the easy answer to that is it's a much simpler version of writing a book. Because when you write a book, you might go out and interview, 30, 40 people on cassette tape.
Yeah.
Then it's rewind, fast forward, rewind, fast forward. You can't see any talking heads. They're just on this cassette tape, writing quotes down, trying to form a story around it, When you do a movie, everybody is on an Avid in front of you. So you can see their facial expressions. You know whether they're happy about that particular part of the story or they're down about that particular part of the story. So to me, it might sound like I'm being silly about it, but it's extreme oversimplified book writing is documentary making, basically, because it's there and I can see it. And I know normally, as a rule, the team who work with us, we have a production company called Geezer and Blonde, and the team who work within that remit, on a number of occasions, they call me the rock and roll Rain Man. I don't even know if that's a compliment or what it is, but it's all right. But I've never, ever, ever, I've been in meetings where people have gone, "Can you show us the treatment?" And I go, "What treatment?" Most of it's in here.
Yeah.
It's just, we go out, we do all the interviews, we come back. My dad was in the building trade, all right, a tradesman, and he used to say to me, "There's no sense in trying to build the house if you haven't got enough bricks." Well, I didn't know that when he was telling me, age like 9, 10, 12, 14. But I can tell you now, sat here now, 15 movies in, there's no sense in making a documentary if you haven't got enough bricks, right? And so out you go, interview as many people as you can who know the subject. They normally fall into two categories. They're either people who were there and experienced everything firsthand, or they are this amazing collection of writers and journalists who you can always find the guy, as it were, or the multiple versions of the guy or the girl, and you go, example, if I was going to do a film tomorrow on Led Zeppelin, my first phone call would be Dave Lewis, who's run this Type Blues fanzine for years. He's an absolute authority on the band. He knows it backwards, right? Similarly, you if you're going to do a film on the Beatles, eventually your path is going to lead, whatever path you take will lead you to Kenneth Womack. That's going to happen. I think that's kind of one of those things where you're going to go, here's a guy who genuinely does know what color socks Ringo was wearing on the 11th of June, 1968. And you go, well, he'll do, he's good.
Yeah.
You put that together with all the people who knew them anyway. Because what you do tend to find, obviously, is when you're interviewing people who knew them anyway, the old memories aren't, oh yeah, we did, yeah, was that 66 or 68 we did that? Well, you can now put it into context if you've got the right number of journalists in, we used to have a rule of thumb a while ago, which was one journalist for every five talking heads that
Right.
knew them. You know,
Yeah.
maybe it's been mixed up a bit over the years, but it was around that, you know. And always try and get some musicians in because I think if you are making a music documentary, it kind of almost doesn't matter whether they were in that band or not.
Mm.
Everybody's been through the same experiences, you know. Uh, you know, if obviously when you're making an unofficial film, you can't get Paul McCartney to talk about the first time he took LSD. You've got to rely on archive, but you can find a guy from another band who'll tell you quite happily about what it's like taking LSD for the first time. But you've got, you know, you've got the real situation there, which is great. You know, that's the way to do it.
Further to what you just said there, I've seen the trailer for Borrowed Time, Lennon's Last Decade. You've got to the point you just made. You've got Earl Slick sitting there, and that must have been a wonderful thing to know you've got access to a man, you know, all that history with Bowie, and
Oh,
that
totally.
period on Double
Totally.
Fantasy, the Milk and Honey recordings, and he's a great raconteur as well. So that must have been great to just be able to have a man like that in the room.
He was amazing. He really was amazing. I mean, what was great about him was the day he came in to do his interview, which we did in bizarrely in London because he was over in London visiting friends, and he came into the studio, and when he came in, we've got two or three people on the team who are big Beatles Lennon fans. We've got the line producer over there who is probably the biggest David Bowie fan I've met in my entire life. So he must have thought, wow, I feel like royalty, you know, these guys are all over me, you know, the kind of, but he was really, really nice bloke. He was so chilled out. And he gave us some amazing answers, you know.
Yeah.
He was quite surprised that we knew as much as we did know about the proposed 1981 tour, because we'd spent, I mean, I'll come to why in a moment, but we'd spent an awful long time on that. And he was like, oh, you know about it? Yeah. You know, to what degree you'd no idea, but you know, he was like, wow, this is really good. We're going to finally get to talk about this, you know.
Yeah, fantastic.
So I think a lot of people like that, Terry Callie, who was around when John joined the peace movement and obviously was a peace activist himself, he was an amazing interview, you know. Tony Palmer was great.
Mm,
Philip Norman, the late great Tony Bramwell, who was an old friend of mine since God knows when, before I could shave, I think. Um,
incredible.
and so yeah, there's some good guys and ladies in there. I mean, the way that the sort of beginnings of Borrowed Time, looking back on it now with the old Einstein, they're probably a lot simpler than anyone would imagine they are, but they're doomed to instant failure because of some we didn't have a crystal ball and we couldn't see into the future. So it's like back end of 2018 when Pepper's all done and dusted and we've had a little rest and we've all been on little holidays and come back and we sit down as we often do, four or five of us, and it's like, well, what's next? And I said, as often I do, if we've just had such a big success with a 50th anniversary Beatles project that wasn't official, in just about 2 years' time, it will be 40 years since John Lennon got assassinated or murdered, depends which side of the fence you're on.
Hmm.
Why don't we make a movie about the last 10 years of his life and we get it into cinema on December the 8th, 2020? And it's just going to happen again. This big rocket ship that we took off and flew to Mars all on our own is going to happen again. And everybody went, oh, sounds good. Yeah, why not? I mean, what a good idea. We started researching. We did quite a deep dive, although over the years, I was just saying to a guy who was interviewing me the other day, because I'd known a lot of people who'd worked for the Beatles or I knew the Beatles very closely, not so much in a work setting, more of a social setting, either over a curry or having a beer somewhere. I'd hear a lot of stories, and then I'd go home and try and find them in books or in documentaries, and they just never existed. So I'd ring up and I go, that story you told me the other day, is that true? Yeah, I don't, and how sort of Apple have kind of woven their own history, and woe betide anyone who doesn't stay on the beaten track. That kind of story isn't on the beaten track, it's over there somewhere. So you'll probably never hear that story. And I thought, well, over the years, I've heard enough of those stories about John Lennon that I could put them all together and turn them into a movie. We literally made a plan that we would spend most of 2019, A, researching and digging as deep as we could, and B, trying to find the money to make this film. So kind of two levels of things going on, you know. We get ourselves into a position where we're ready to start shooting it very early 2020, like maybe late Jan, early February. Everything's on a path for that to be correct. And then two things happen. The first is along comes a guy called Mark Cunningham, who I met on social media, bizarrely enough, even though, as we've joked about since, we must have been to the same music industry parties about every night for about 38 years, right? And Mark said, you know, there's this story John was going to do a 1981 world tour. And I, as Mr. Lennon here said, yeah, I know I've heard that, but that's about all you can find out about it, right? There's no, we don't know who the band necessarily would be or who the tour manager would be or what the stage set would look like. He goes, I do. You do? Yeah, I used to work at Britannia Row, and my boss was the guy, one of my bosses was the guy who went over to America in October 80 and worked out all the stage set with John and Yoko. He's the same guy who later did the Pink Floyd Wall show in 1980 at Earl's Court, did all the stage sets.
Wow.
So we go, do these exist? Yeah. There's rough diagrams and ideas and this stage show, believe me, I'm not trying to over egg this particular pudding, but I promise you it's true. This stage show would have been 1981, right? When you see how technical it is and how many screens and things on cantilever arms, and you go, U2 and Metallica weren't doing that for another 25 years. This is 81, this would have been.
Mm.
So we, with Mark's help, we start doing an even bigger, deeper dive. But also, we're supposed to start filming in January, February 2020. We hit early March 2020, and along comes COVID. And we go, oh, they've closed the world down. And being artists and entertainment people, we go, what about our deadline for December 8th, 2020? Yeah, bye-bye. No deadline. So it kind of got to the point where it's like, let's do another year's research. Now, during the second year's research, we found some more archive that I'd never seen, and I own, God would know how many DVDs and Blu-rays of the Beatles, bootlegs included, about 6 shelves in the other room.
I feel you.
Then we were finding other things we had no clue of. So it's like, okay, so the Double Fantasy band were going to be the live group. So that would have been Earl Slick and, Andy White, all these guys. We then found out who the tour manager was. And this guy's a big established tour manager, since worked with Aerosmith and, God knows how many other big American bands. Then we find out who the front of house engineer was going to be. Then we find the guy who's been poised to break the press story for Geffen. So, and then we're like, wow, we've got more information on this too than anyone's ever been near in their lives.
Yeah.
So the plan was, right, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, but what we are trying to do is take all the stories you've heard about John from about 66-ish when he meets Yoko up to his death, and then including what would have been the plans for the following year. And if there's anything that we see along that route that suddenly has been told to me over the years in a social setting, but not quite the way we've all read it in books and seen it in documentaries, then we're going to go, here's what you think you know, here's what happened. Here's what you think you know, here's what happened.
Yeah.
And I think they counted maybe 30 very small stories that we've put a new twist on. But these are stories that are coming absolutely directly from the horse's mouth. There's a guy in the film called Jerry Cagle, who was an American radio producer. He was very much involved in The Lost Weekend. He was in the studio when the rock and roll album was being done with Phil Spector. He knew John right up to John's passing. This guy has been turning down interviews for 43 years. And through a friend of a friend who knew about me and who knew about our team and who knew about, more importantly, our integrity, Jerry's in the film. And I go, wow. Because when we met Jerry, I could have interviewed that guy for 5 days. I mean, he
Yeah.
was like, he sat down, he started talking, and we go, he's good. So finally, in April or May 21, when we realized that our target date for release we've missed by a country mile, we actually start shooting. And all the crew and anybody we may have sold it to, because we had an idea we'd go back to Kaleidoscope because they did a great job on Sergeant Pepper. Everybody was, well, when's this film coming out? And I went, do you not get it? There's now no pressure. It comes out when it's ready.
Perfect.
We started off with around 25 people who either knew John well for a minimum of 5 years or more, and maybe a smattering of journalists. Kenneth Womack, who I didn't personally know, and then people who I did know from, Mojo and Q and some of the bigger British magazines, right? Pat Gilbert's a good example there because we've known each other a hell of a long time, probably 30 odd years or more. And I was kind of thinking, well, 25 is not a bad number. I think we interviewed 19 people for the Pepper film, so 25 is good. Before 2021 ended, 25 people was now 60 because people were literally picking up the phone, either ringing Alexa, the producer, or me, or Margarita, our line producer, and going, you know the guy who did the Sergeant Pepper film? Yeah. Is that the Lennon guy? Yeah. When do you want me?
Huh.
And it was this domino effect where you did an interview and 3 interviews came out of it.
Incredible.
You went to talk to somebody else and 6 people. I mean, we ended up in Venice for a few days talking to an eyewitness to John's shooting, who's still alive, God love him. We ended up in Los Angeles talking to a lady who actually met the killer, actually saw him on the street and spoke to him and had an exchange of views with him and said she thought he was a nutcase, but she said, I couldn't find a policeman around, so there's no one to scream to. So she said, but I didn't know there was a gun in his jacket pocket. And she said, I just thought, cuckoo, and carried on walking.
Wow.
We also went to a mountaintop in North Carolina, of all places, to meet a legal guy, lawyer, who'd looked after John in 1975 when maybe he may have ended up totally unwittingly getting in bed with a mafia. There's a record label that we had mafia connections,
Yeah.
and they were
Roots.
trying to put a bootleg album out,
Yeah.
TV advertised. There was so much stuff. I think when we got into the studio to start the edit, for the first time probably since Monty Python, and bear in mind, Monty Python was a 6-hour project, but for the first time since Python, we probably had about 80 or 90 hours of talking heads. God would know how much archive, some animation recreation, and enough still photographs to wallpaper 30 rooms. And we go, what we're going to do with this lot? What we're going to make borrowed time?
It's an embarrassment of riches by the sounds.
It's the longest edit I've ever been in my life, literally. Yeah. We'll come to that in a moment or two. But it's been a real trip. I mean, we've been on this particular. Normally, every film we've made to date has taken anywhere between 14 and 18 months from trying to raise the money to being in the cinema. We go into cinemas in the United Kingdom on this one on the 2nd of May.
Right.
And when we go into cinemas, we'll have been working on this film over 5.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
How do you find that process of the narrative thread to pull through in that decade with that, as I said, an embarrassment of riches by the sounds? You've got so much great content there and so many new discoveries. I imagine the editing process must be the challenge of what do I take out in order to hold a thread that I can pull through?
The very first idea, which a number of the reviews that I'd read for the Sergeant Pepper movie, probably from Beatles fan magazines and that kind of thing, right? Although a few were national mainstream, had said it's a great movie. There's a lot of stuff in there that Beatles fans didn't know about, but It's only 2 hours long. One guy said if it had been another 2 hours long, I'd have sat and watched all 4 hours. So the plan A, and believe me, when you take 5.5 years over something, I think we're up to about plan W, X, Y, or Z. But plan A was go in the studio, cut something extremely substantial, because the worst case scenario then will be that you can cut it into 3 or 4 parts and sell it as a TV series, right? So the first time we came out the studio, I had a movie which, believe it or not, lasted 3 hours and 28 minutes.
Mm.
We took it for sale, and almost everybody we went near said, Alan, yeah, how long do you think people have got? You know, this film's longer than Ben Hur, for God's sake. The Ten Commandments. What cinema do you think's going to show this? And I went, yeah, but if you're a Lennon fan, like I'm a Lennon fan, you're going to love this movie. And they went, yeah, but who's going to sit and watch it in one lump? Okay, well, what if we make it 3 parts? It's not a TV series, Alan, it's a movie. And it comes across as a big movie, a big production. Okay. So there was a while of that went on. And I said, I think this would be early part of last year. I said, well, you know what? Why don't we go back in the studio and make it Sergeant Pepper length? So I went back in the studio and I made it Sergeant Pepper, slightly longer because Pepper's 2 hours. We did a cut that was 2 hours and 8 minutes long, right? And I'm just literally saying to a few pals of mine in the industry and people I go for a pint with on a Saturday, I said, oh yeah, we've cut it down to 2 hours, 8 minutes. They're going, no, I remember seeing the 320 6 months ago, and it's the best John Lennon film I've seen in my life. And I'm going, right, but nobody wants it. Cinemas don't want to show it because they think it's too long. I'm told not to cut it down because it's not a TV series by those who know. So what do we do with it? And a friend of mine who I've known a number of years, who was one of the very few people we'd actually shown it to, he said, you get these movies and they come out, and then about 10 years later, there's normally a new DVD and Blu-ray version. It's got the movie, and on disc 2, it's got the director's cut. And I went, right. And he said, have you never thought, knowing that the people who predominantly buy this will more than likely be the people that bought your Sergeant Pepper film and then a few more? So what if you put it out, but on the very same day, the bonus feature, rather than having loads of little separate bonus features, which we do on almost every DVD we've done, I think there was 4.5 hours of extra material on the Pepper one and with a 2 hour movie. Rather than have a load of little bonus features, you have the movie and then you have the 3.5 hour director's cut. And I went, you're a genius. That's a brilliant idea. Of course, when I take it out for sale, different than the first time, I only go to see one man who I knew would be interested because he'd been involved in Pepper. And I go, we've got this film, but we've also, the bonus cut will be a director's cut. And he went, I'm in, I'll take it.
Yeah.
10-minute job,
Fantastic.
And we go, well, let's put it out next year. This was just before Christmas. We did the deal on it.
Right.
What's been funny about it, and this again, there's no blame lies anywhere within our gang about this, is because we're passionate about what we do. I think we first mentioned it on social media in about January 2019, when we had a sort of rough header card and a picture of John that said borrowed time. So every Beatles fan in the world, literally every 2 months, where's this film?
Yeah.
When's the Lennon film coming out? I don't know. I was able to play my best Scooby and Shaggy rolled into one. When it's ready, I don't know. When we have something we think we want to show you, we know that what we've got is a bit special. We know that what we've got was put together, but I mean, I saw, as you know, there's a press embargo to a certain date, which they always do with these things. Yes. I saw the first review last week. The Western world won't see it till late April.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to come over as some kind of drama queen. That's not me. But I sat there and I cried like a child for about 30 minutes. And I looked at my business partner and I went, vindicated.
Fantastic.
Now I've done something, I know that I think hardcore John Lennon fans are going to go, wow, finally, someone's done a film that touches on absolutely everything from about 1966 to the 81 tour, that looks at it logically and that comes at it from a point of view of people who, in 80% of cases, were actually in that room when those events happened, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and there are things, as I say, that I'm not saying they're necessarily all new stories, but they're stories that you don't necessarily have heard this way, you know? Um, and I'm just so thankful to the people who I had two rules, if you like. Every interviewee we sat down, I said, number one, like, especially in the case of the people who knew John personally, without sounding morbid, none of you getting any younger. This may be the last time anybody points a camera at you and says, "Tell us your story." So let's get it right.
Yeah.
Okay, let's use that. If you've got anything to say that you think hasn't been said or has been mummified by the official channels, let's put it straight. And the second one, which I think every John Lennon fan in the world will at least give me a nod of recognition for, is you mention the murderer's name and we turn the camera off, pay you up, and you're going home. I don't want that scumbag's name in my movie, right?
Perfect.
I've been honest about that right from day one.
Yeah.
You know, we can refer to him as the murderer, the assassin, whatever you want to do, but you mention his name, and you know, because I don't want his name on a cinema screen. It's going to be a
Perfect.
celebration. You know.
When you told that story a moment ago about weeping when you read that review, I'm just wondering, we were talking before we started recording, you talked about being 8 or 9 when the Beatles hit you. I was around the same age, second generation fan, and
Yeah.
it changed my brain. It kind of lit a fire in me that goes on to this day. And people that know what that is. When you are reading a review like that, is that boy still in there? Because you're contributing now to
Oh
the
God, yeah.
story of this icon at a global level, and
God, yeah.
you're playing a part in leaving legacy and story. There must be a little
Yeah.
part of that boy that's still in there that says, look at this.
I was born with a it's not a rare condition. It still exists to this day. Paris Hilton's little boy is one of the guys who's got it. It's too long a word for someone with dyslexia, but it's Malacephi or something. It basically means double skull, big head. You have a big head,
Yeah.
and I was about that big, way under this camera line. But you'd see the top of my head. I was tiny. I was like quite stick thin. Um, and I was bullied to death at
Yeah.
school. I mean, no two ways about it. So I spent more time at home than, say, my brother did or anybody else in the area where we lived, you know. I was in my bedroom, I had my Marvel comics, I was obsessed with my TV shows. I was probably the most dedicated male Bay City Rollers fan on planet Earth, right down to mum sewing tartans on jeans, because the girls at junior school were probably among the people who didn't bully me. You know, there was kind of a few lads, but not very many. But the girls, you know, but I didn't go out to play at all.
Yeah.
Uh, the short version of the story is that a friend of my father's, remember, you get the old TDK 90-minute tapes,
I
and
do.
you could fit an album on both sides, a
That's
full
right.
album. So I'd be about 9 years old, and I really was. I mean, you know, I was looking for a hero, right?
Yeah.
In a desperate way. I just wanted somebody to, you know, my mum and dad were incredible people, and my brother was great, but I wanted somebody to almost point a finger from the sky at me and go, "Now it's your turn. Things are going to be okay," you know. And I got this tape, and on the tape was my introduction to the Beatles. So on side one was the Rubber Soul album,
Mm.
and on side two was the Revolver album. Now there is a story that my mother told. I mean, they're both gone now, my parents, but there's a story that my mother told forever to anybody she met that was new. And it's me coming downstairs, having listened to this tape, crying and saying, "Mum, there's a song on there about me." And she said, "No, I don't. Honestly, they split up a while ago." I'm like, "No, there's a song on there about me." So put it in the hi-fi, play it to mum and dad, and it was Nowhere Man.
Huh.
And I was sat there, sort of, you know, smiling along, and it's, you know, this guy is trying to get a message to me, and you know, Fast forward to Christmas that year, and my father bought me my first ever copy of Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Now, I was born and raised in Blackburn, Lancashire.
Yeah.
So Christmas Day, I put it on, and this guy who I really do at this, whimsical age of 9, and all my dreams and fantasies are wrapped up in things like Lewis Carroll and Spider-Man and, Howard the Duck. And I put this thing on, and this guy sings, read the news today, 4,000 holes in Blackburn. And I go, Mum, Dad, he's trying to get a message to me. This is
Great.
personal. This isn't about you or you. This is, first there's nowhere man. Now he's name checking where we live,
Yeah.
right? And at that moment, about 9 or 10 years of age, going into being 10, this guy, John Lennon, who I've never met, who is a lot older than me, and who I will never, ever meet, becomes my big brother. David, who is still very much there, my younger brother, 12, 16 months my junior, and up there's John. And John is someone I can get to know so much about without leaving that bedroom.
Yeah.
Because there's books, there's, more records. And I think certainly before I was 12 and a half, 13, my dad had bought the albums and we had everything, the blue one and the white album and this sort of thing. And then in the period between, I think, the first and second year of secondary school, which was a different crowd entirely and a nicer crowd, but something odd happened. I mean, my mother was so confused by it. They took me to a doctor. I went from this little fella that went bump 6'4", bump 10-inch chest to 60-inch chest, and sort of, minus the tattoos, everything's as you see it. And so my all outward persona changed.
Yeah.
And in the middle of all this was this guy, John Lennon, who not long after my 15th birthday was shot dead in New York.
Yeah.
And I was it was like losing a parent, because Dad told me in the morning after hearing something on the radio, and I sat there and cried that much that when I went to school, I had an art teacher called Jack Jefferson. He's probably long gone by now, but he was a Beatles fan. And he called me into his room at lunchtime and said, I know what today's about for you. How do you feel?
Yeah.
And but it was, and so it's been, I don't know if you saw the press release, the girls just did, it says on the press release, and it's no more than the truth, this is my 15th movie, but this is the most personal movie.
I was about to
Because
ask
I
you that
feel
same
like I've
thing.
got to say, thanks, mate.
Yeah.
Took a long time. I'm
Yeah.
60 in 6 weeks, but that 9-year-old kid
Yeah.
still has to say thank you.
Yeah. I hear you loud and clear. Very similar themes running through my own journey there. It was much more than just music. And he was a North Star for me in so many ways too. The quote I heard years ago from Jack Douglas, I saw him being interviewed, and he said he always gets asked, what was Lennon like? We have an idea of him, but what was he like? And Jack says, to loosely quote him, to paraphrase him, he was like what he seemed to be to you lyrically and musically. That when you hear him speak in interviews, that's him. There's no artifice. If you want to know what he was like, he was what you believe him to have been like, as honestly as he expressed himself. When you've talked to all of these people over the years, I'm imagining that you start to get a sense of a portrait of the man that over time, it probably becomes clearer and more accurate beyond celebrity. Have you got a good sense of him more so through this whole process?
It's bizarre. When we started doing the movie, I didn't really think that I could learn a great deal. But I think over the course of the last 5 years, it's been like going to a degree for me, probably more than anybody else on the team, going to John Lennon University and sitting down with my little book and going, right, we think we know that, but maybe there's a twist on that story. We think we know that, but maybe there's, and obviously having the whole 1981 tour thing, which has taken up a huge amount of everybody's time, but for good reason. You know, when you see it on screen, you'll go, wow, this is in the past. I think every Lennon fan on the planet knew a degree about that tour that would have been, but they're going to come out of seeing Borrowed Time and go, wow, we didn't know anything like that. We thought we knew a little bit, but now here's the full story, you know. Um, it's funny because in the long cut, it's the very last story. So you've got to wait 3 hours and 20, well, 19 minutes, whatever, to get to it, right? In the new version, in what we're calling the commercial version, which we're all very proud of, it's the very first thing after the opening credits.
Huh.
Because what I wanted to do is, I thought, right, I do know that a lot of the fans who've been very faithful to us and who've stuck with us for these 5 years and asked questions and blah, blah, they want to see something really cool. Wouldn't it be great if the opening credits end and we go straight into this huge story that at best they probably know that much about? And now we can go, oof. The only problem there was with that, and I'm not going to give away how I did it, but I then had to look at the crew in the studio and go, and how do we get from there to the Jesus Christ apology? I don't know how we do that.
Yeah.
I don't know how we do that, you know. But we found a way, and it was, you know, and it works, so that was good. But yeah, that was funny. But yeah, I'm immensely proud of it, you know. As I say, if it's anybody's fault that it's taken this long, then you're currently speaking to him. You know, I'm the guy who, you know, I've had at least 4 or 5 people on the table. Oh, well, surely it's ready now. Not yet. No, let's get it how we want it to be.
Did you find those years challenging from 75 to 80 when he hits New York? You know, he's active, he's everywhere,
Yeah,
and he's vocal, he's noisy, and then you know there's the Lost Weekend, and then there's the Coming Back Together. There's rock and roll, and
yeah,
as loud as he is, he then becomes the complete opposite, and obviously
yes.
rediscovers you know this whole other happiness. How
Yeah.
just I'm wondering, without giving too much away, how did you approach those years of I guess public absence?
I think where we were quite lucky is we could come in from a slightly different angle. So we cover 70 to 75. We then have a much more deep dive into the whole green card situation and how he was allowed to stay in the end and this, that, and the other. Then there's a few little things that maybe people won't know too much about. There's also some very interesting takes on what did actually happen in that 5 year period because, you know, I mean, uh, you know, again, without giving too much away, I think when he did finally decide to come back and make an album, for example, a man of his stature could have very easily rung up EMI or whoever and said, I'm making an album. Are you ready to go? You know, slide me some money, we're away. Their decision was kind of down the line of, we will pay for everything. That way, if we don't like what we get at the end of it, we can scrap the project anyway. And we don't want to sign the album to anybody who wants to hear it. And you think, hang on, I've spent years working for a record label. Even though you're John Lennon and you're that big, you believe someone's going to sign your album without hearing it. And along comes a man who did.
Yeah,
And to quote one again, I won't give too much, but to
sure.
quote one of our interviewees, you've kind of bought a pig in a poke, haven't you? Because you buy 10 tracks believing it's all John Lennon and find out 5 of them are by Yoko Ono.
That's right.
I remember, you know, this next bit isn't in the movie, so I can say it quite
Yeah.
clearly. I remember going to the record shop, October 1980, excited as hell because this guy who's been such a big part of my life for the last 6 years has now released an album that I can actually buy on release day because I'm 15 years old. So I've got, you know, I've got pocket money and my Saturday job or my paper round, and I can get this album on release day. And I go to get it. And I remember coming home on the number 17 bus to Mill Hill with the album, like we all used to do, you know, read the lyrics and see the back and see what's going on. And I thought, wow, 10 brand new John Lennon songs. The fact that he was kissing Yoko on the cover and it said, because they'd done many albums where she'd been name checked, but she didn't sing a word. And I get home and I put it on and I go, hang on, what's this? Oh, another John said, hang on, what's this?
Yeah.
And by the time it got to the end, as much as I enjoyed the John songs, there was a side of me that almost felt like because he'd been away for so long, I basically bought an extended EP. An EP would have had 4 songs. I've got 5 songs because I didn't see myself ever playing. Don't get me wrong, some of the Yoko stuff's all right,
Yeah.
but some of it you're like, and then when you're doing the when you're doing the movie, you find out the reason why the album was like that. And then, believe me, it's not the obvious reason by
Right.
any stretch of
Okay.
imagination. And so, you know, it's a very bizarre concept as to how it came to be like that completely. And then you realize that when years later, posthumously, we got Milk and Honey,
Yeah.
as far as I can see from the research and the work we've done, the only reason we got Milk and Honey is because John had written 10 songs for an album.
Right. There we go.
So
Yeah.
there's 10 more were recorded at that session and finished, and they were going to be, presumably they were going to be part of this album, but they weren't.
Yeah.
They were held for 4 years, whatever it was.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things where you go, oh, I thought this. Maybe now I don't think this anymore.
Yeah.
And it is interesting. It's interesting what's come out there, you
Yeah.
know. So yeah, I guess there's as close as anyone's going to get to back information about what was going on in those years.
Yes.
I don't say that we've nailed every day of every month of every year because I don't think anyone could, but we've got as close as you could get by getting in as much as we can.
No, that's wonderful. We're almost at our time, so thank you again for sitting with me. The idea of that 81 tour and then starting where you do with that element of the story adds to the tragedy, doesn't it? Because
Totally,
he was
totally.
back. He was obviously filled with hope, and he had a plan to be back on that global stage again. It only adds to the whole idea of what could have been.
I'm sure you're the same as me on this one. There was those 2 amazing, incredibly long interviews at the end of his life. Andy Peebles, BBC, Dave Scholl, San Francisco, with Laurie. And I got to say, as a fan, those 2 interviews I think one came to me via a bootleg from a record fair on a tape, and one I taped myself from BBC Radio 1, like every other fan did at the time. And I must have played those going into my 16th year. I must have played those interviews till I knew him backwards in like Yugoslavian. And I knew every word, and he sounded so happy. He sounded like, I've been away, I'm back, things are wonderful, this is how it's going to be. And then you look at the fact that John, who totally more so than Paul or George or Ringo, hadn't really toured since the Beatles
Yeah.
ended. He'd done the odd gig here or there, but there'd never been a John Lennon tour, so to speak. You then learn that the biggest reason for wanting to do the tour is he wants to come home.
Huh.
And he wants to play Wembley. He wants to be in Liverpool, and he is planning an outdoor show on one of the docks, and that Paul did 10 years later. This kind of thing. So, what we were robbed of is unbelievable.
Yeah.
We're 45 years this year away from the man's
Yeah.
murder, and within those 45 years, God knows what he would have come up with.
Yeah.
My take on it is if he was willing to do a tour that big in 81, that would no doubt have slid into 82 because the plan was to do another album and, continue, break album, get on the road again. And the way I see it is, had he, we can be optimistic and say, had he remained as prolific as Paul, or maybe even just slightly less prolific than Paul, there's no reason to believe that he wouldn't, for all his boisterousness, there's no reason to believe he wouldn't be doing Vegas residencies this year.
Yeah.
Because that's where they all end. Eventually they all go into
Yeah.
a Vegas residency. And you go, that's not too far a stretch.
Yeah.
you think John Lennon, would John have done a well, John, I don't think John at 85 would have been the same cantankerous sod as he could be at 30, right? So there's got to be a bit of mildness goes in there somewhere as
Yeah.
well. But I do believe that, that we have been, I saw in one of the reviews that one of the critics said we've been robbed of 44 years of this guy, so we'll never know what could have been. And I thought, no, it's a fair point. We were robbed of it. I mean, this eyewitness guy who lived in the building across road on the 12th floor, he said in his interview, the first what must clearly have been the first bullet sounded like a very loud bang. He said, but when you live close by Central Park in New York and on the 12th floor, loud bangs aren't exactly something that, they happen 95 times a day. So he ran to the window, looked both ways, couldn't see nothing, looked down, and this guy is stood in a combat stance, unloading bullets into this guy that he knows is John Lennon. He then spends about the next 6 hours till sunrise, sat in this big bay window, watching this thing unfold from the police arriving to the arrest to this, and God love him. He happened again, these things for people like me are utterly incredible that something like that happens. So when he's a painter, this guy, oil on canvas guy, and when he moved to Venice, the flat across the road, which was his 6 hour long bird's eye view of the whole thing unfolding, he sold to his best friend. So we're in chatting away with him and saying, well, that'd be something. Wondered if we had your eye view. Oh, we can get you my eye view. My mate lives there. Wow, really?
Yeah, absolutely. What a
Up we
journey.
go a few days later in New York, and we've set up a camera inside this window, and
Yeah.
we've got exactly what he saw that
Man,
night.
what an amazing journey you've been on. What do you think?
Shoot it.
Do you have a picture of what you hope the audience takes away when Borrowed Time, Lennon's Last Decade is out there? What do you hope it leaves people with?
I think if they're big John Lennon fans like me, and very obviously yourself talking to you, then I hope that they're going to come out thinking, finally, we've got a bit more clarity on the picture. I don't, as I say, I didn't come here to reinvent the wheel. That's not part of it at all. We have got an incredible musical soundtrack by a good musician friend of mine by the name of David Palfreyman. We've got a great end song which was written about John's death and the tragedy of it all by a group called Giorgio and the Teeth. We've got other songs that are in the long version that didn't make the shorter version. I think we did an orchestral score on Pepper. We decided to go for a proper rock soundtrack on this. What we do have as I said, in spade loads is we have great stories right from the horse's mouth. We have them backed up by facts by people who have written about Lennon forever, books or magazine specials or whatever, and know the color of his socks on every day. We've got some amazing photos, some I've seen before, some I've not seen before, some great archive, and some good animation that works where it works, basically. Nothing too silly. We weren't AI and we're just going for standard animation and, keep it real. And of course, we have the original rough pencil sketches for the stage sets, which we're then able to turn into animated stage sets, So we're going to take you on a hell of a journey, and we're even going to take you into the realms of pure fantasy, into what might have happened in 1981.
Yeah.
And then when I think one thing is quite funny, actually, I showed the film to a friend of mine about 10 days ago, the 2 hour cut. And at the end of it, he put his arms around me and he gave me a hug and he said, 5.5 years and you've used them well. I said, great.
That's great.
That's fantastic. And I must say something quickly, that one of the things that I'm really proud of is that in its 3.5 hour incarnation, I was able to show it to Tony Bramwell before he left us.
great.
And he loved it. He loved it. He gave me a big hug. He said, "You told me you were going to make a film about my mate." And I went, "Yeah." He goes, "You've reinvented the wheel, mate." And he gave me a hug. And so, that was great. That was lovely.
I wanted to ask you actually if this was the last time we'll see Tony on film, because I imagined when I saw the trailer, this might be the last thing he did. And you've covered that, and to have that moment with him
think
must
it's
have
the
been
last
something
long
else.
form. I think it's the last long form interview that Tony did on
Yeah,
camera. Tony to me was always, I mean, I knew him from being 18, 19 from Beatle conventions in Liverpool.
yeah,
We got to know each other. So before I moved to London, when I came to London, we'd hook up and have a beer and sit chatting. Tony to me, throughout different projects, whether it's the Beatles or bands he worked with at Polydor over the years and blah, blah, it's not necessarily just about what you get on screen from him. It's also about things where he'll say, "Are you interviewing blah, blah tomorrow?" "Yeah." "Do yourself a favor, mate. Ask him about blah, blah." "Oh, really?" You'll get the right answers if you put that in, if you try that. So Tony, again, I said this when we did the Pepper film at the first London screening, he was in the audience. And I said, Tony Bramwell, ladies and gentlemen, who it's not just what you see on screen, it's what he brings to it.
yeah,
It's his connections and it's his knowledge that if you poke certain people in the right way, they're going to tell you something, ask him that,
yeah,
and you'll get the right answer,
yeah. It's
definitely.
wonderful.
Great, we got him down to see it, the 3.5 hour version. As I said, he loved it. He just
Yeah,
said, "This is really, really cool."
yeah. What a journey you've
So,
been on, mate.
yeah,
And it's been great to spend some time with you here. I really appreciate it. When I saw it was 50 years ago today, Sergeant Pepper and Beyond, I knew someone had arrived here that not only understood the source, but clearly loved it and was deep in it. And then when I saw
yeah,
that you were behind this concept, I thought, oh, here we go. This is going to be something
yeah.
else. And to have the opportunity to sit and talk with you here has been a highlight for me. So thank you for sitting down
Somebody,
and doing that.
someone said to me the other day, "So this is the last Beatles film then?" I said, "Oh yeah." I said, "Because we need to do other things. There's other bands we're talking to get back on the official movies." I said, "But I think now I've done my work here is done, if you like. I've done my job." So,
Didn't you have that same attitude around pistols as well? Like no more pistols. And
I don't
then,
know. I think with the Pistols, but the Pistols in my life was actually quite an odd one because
right.
there was no big plan to do as much as I ended up doing.
Yeah.
But it was like a domino effect. You did one thing, and then suddenly someone came along and go, "Oh, I enjoyed that. Could you do this?"
Yes.
And
Yes.
I kept saying yes. And eventually, my old agent, who's still a good friend of mine, said to me, "You got to start saying no.
Yeah. Right.
It's your life. Don't feel, you know." And again, just to end on here, because I think it's very important, is if you look at my life and what I've been involved in, whether it's books or my name on an album or touring or press or making movies or whatever it might be, right, for magazines, the perception, because of the way that the entertainment world works, is if he does something about this band, he must therefore be their number one fan. I must have worked with or around 20, 30 bands in my career that I barely own a record by.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because a lot of the time it would be a case of someone's paying you a wage to do that. The perception then becomes he must be a big fan. Not really. I might, there are bands I've actually worked with and then become aware of. And there are other bands that I've kind of been associated with, and it genuinely couldn't be any further from the truth about what my supposed fandom is of that scenario.
Yeah.
So I think it's just the career path is once you get yourself into that world, I mean, probably without doubt, if you take the Beatles out the equation, it's Motley Crue, it's Def Leppard, it's Bon Jovi, it's Metallica, it's Thin Lizzy. There's an awful lot of that going on. To the point where it's quite funny. One of the guys we interviewed for the Lennon film was a very well-known Beatles associated journalist, shall we say, and I turn up in all my motorcycle leather and wallet chain and all the tattoos, and I've got this wool hat on with a Metallica logo on, and he looks at me, he goes to our DOP. who's he? He goes, he's the director. He goes, what, of a John Lennon film? Are you kidding me? He said, no, you'll find it's all good. You're in safe hands. It's all right. So,
Yeah, great.
yeah, it's nuts. But yeah, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
We hope you enjoyed the show. You know the name, look up the socials. You'll find us on Facebook and Instagram where we can all come together. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe and spread the word. It all helps raise the profile of the You Can Talk to Me podcast. Thanks for listening.